Hey everybody, I am back today to do another episode of Inquisitorial Thoughts, and this will be episode 7. And this will be game time versus narrative time. So, for those of you that are not watched my Inquisitorial Thoughts videos before, these aren't videos to actually get any sort of tactical advantage or playing the game from a competitive standpoint. These are purely just musings and thoughts on that primarily revolve around narrative play, the way we look at our war games, and potentially it could be around things that help with painting, not so much instructional, but just maybe more from how we approach things from a behavioral standpoint. So today, the topic is game time within our miniature games versus narrative time, or the time that is taking place in the game that we're playing. How is that actually important to us? How does it affect the way we approach the games? I found this just sort of interesting. You know, narrative, we've talked about on the channel before, at least, how the narrative's important for us in playing miniature games, and not just having sort of pieces of paper on the table, but we're sort of immersing ourselves into this world to enjoy it. So not only just to play within a set of rules and have like a winner or have a loser, or just to have an event or a story unfold, but also just to, you know, immerse yourself into that world and enjoy the atmosphere of the game. So I have X-Wing in front of us here, and the reason I have X-Wing in front of us here today is because for me it represented one of those extremes when looking at game time versus narrative time. I happened to be playing a game of X-Wing 2 weeks ago, and I had a really good game. I really enjoyed it. And after the game I was visualizing what had happened in my head, and I thought about it, and I thought, you know, really, I'm just grabbing this Millennium Falcon here because I was Rebels. From starting here, the movement for the entire game, and we tend to play a little longer because we do flip through the rulebook occasionally, and so I would say maybe it lasted an hour. I probably went with this ship and did pretty much a trajectory like this. And I think I did what they call a K-turn. I was just going a little off camera, but maybe it was just a little bit to the left there. And that was the entire movement of that Millennium Falcon for the game. Now granted, there was shooting and other things happening, but I kind of thought about that. And I thought, you know what? That happened really quick in the narrative time of the game. That hour that I spent was probably, I'm guessing, in the area of 10 to 30 seconds in real time. Alright, sorry, not real time, but narrative time. So the hour of game time was probably 10 to 30 seconds of narrative time, like in that world of what was happening. And it was really fun. I really like X-Wing. But it caused me to just reflect on it, and a light bulb kind of went off, and I thought, wow, like now I'm kind of looking at this just even a little bit differently. Like everything is happening so fast in these space fighting dogfights, that you're simulating it in a very much a slowed down version in real time of what's happening, for lack of a better word, at light speed, you know, in the game. And I thought that was very cool. That, like, just observing that and ruminating on that, I thought was very cool. Now, then I thought further, and I thought about my other games, and the first thing that came to me was not to compare the ship battles and things like that, but I just immediately thought of some of the historical games I play in 40K. Now, in these situations, standard 40K, you know, things like bolt action, musket, and tomahawks, I generally have guys foot slogging it across a field, you know, through woods, things like that. And I'm, you know, it's not, I'll just throw it out there that probably games, I'm usually playing 2 to 3 hour games, you know, things like that. And I'm guessing that in narrative time, it's oftentimes probably representing something from 15 to 30 minutes. Foot slogging across a field, getting into a battle, moving over here, moving over there. I might even be pushing it out a bit. It might be even more, 10 to 15 minutes. But it's definitely not seconds, and it's definitely not hours. It's definitely not measured in seconds, definitely not measured in hours. And so that's interesting to me. And then I don't really play traditional war games. I probably will at one point, where you have mass lines of troops, really mass scale large battles over maybe a big battlefield. Something like Napoleonics or Ancients, maybe Warhammer Fantasy to a degree, depending on how big the game is. Those kinds of games I don't have a lot of experience with, even though I do play a lot of miniature games. But I envision those games as taking more time, potentially in the movement phase of narrative time compared to real time. So when you have 100 troops moving across a very large battlefield, they may be moving 5 minutes to a location just within one move. When you have two sets of troops of 100 colliding against each other and battling it out turn after turn, you could conceivably have something lasting, one melee and a half hour, potentially. Particularly when they're sort of breaking off and regrouping and going back and things like that. Interested in other folks' opinions. I'm not an expert on that, but that's what I envision. So when we're immersing ourselves in the world of this game, how does that affect the way you enjoy the narrative? How does that affect the way you perceive the games? Do you find this idea of a big difference in the rate of time that goes on in a game to affect the way you think and enjoy the game? Now you may say, Palmer, you're thinking way too much into this. Why would you enjoy the game more or less based on that? Something as relative as time, in a fictional world or fictional simulation. Well, it's interesting. I don't have the answer for that. I was kind of trying to think of that myself, and I thought sometimes in some games you may find that you're a bit on the edge of your seat if you're playing a game like X-Wing, where every single sort of movement that's happening from turn to turn and action, like you might be within a very compressed space having a lot of actions. Now that's a game mechanics issue, and it's not so much a perceived time issue. It's I think related, but not the same thing. So maybe tangentially related to this discussion. You may find that it's all happening kind of quickly. In my mind, now that I see this game for what it is, happening really fast, it kind of puts me a little bit on the edge of my seat. Whereas maybe an opposite feel, and let's not use the historical example, let's stick with a space example. Maybe I'm playing a game that's about galactic conquest, and I have huge ships over spans of galaxies, like moving in, and you're simulating war as it's happening on a grander scale. And maybe in that case, even though I'm still rolling dice, and maybe even though I'm still covering distance with models and I'm still shooting things, maybe the feel of the game is much more at a strategic level. Some people are probably thinking Star Wars Armada when I say this. I'm kind of going even out further than that, like, as far as the size of the game. But maybe you're thinking about it more on a strategic level. You feel a bit more relaxed. You feel the coldness of space and the slowness of time and the amount of pressure you're going to exert from all these different directions, seeing things happening, trying to see things happening several steps ahead. Now, these are just observations, just as how the game feels and how you enjoy it and how that relates to time passing within your narrative versus time passing in the game itself. Somebody could easily say, you know what, that's a bad example because you have to think several steps ahead in X-Wing too, even when it's sort of a perceived fast-paced game. I would agree with that. That's actually one of the things you have to do in X-Wing. But I do think sometimes our enjoyment is based on the feel of the game. And for me, recently, narrative time passed versus game time passed has become one additional element of several that makes me feel games differently as to how I perceive and enjoy them. I'm interested in your thoughts. Does this ever come to mind for you when you play the games you play? Do you have any observations about some of the games you play and sort of the time that it takes you to play the game versus the time that the game sort of traverses within the narrative? I'm interested. Take care, everybody.